What's up, guys? It's Dwayne, back again for another video, back again for another reaction, and today's a great, wonderful, beautiful, amazing day. Do you know why? I'll tell you why. Because it's another Finland day. What will Finland bring to NATO? Without further ado, let's get into this reaction. Let's go.
Vladimir Putin had been hoping to prevent. When the Russian autocrat announced his full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, one of his stated goals was to halt the eastward expansion of NATO, to ensure that no other European country would ever again seek shelter beneath the alliance's nuclear umbrella.
I bet Putin was pissed. I bet he was so annoyed that Finland, that you guys joined NATO, and he was definitely trying to push himself more to the west as possible, trying to take over. So like, yeah, Finland, you were next. Finland, you were next. He did not want you guys to join NATO, but I'm glad you're part of NATO now.
Instead, his unprovoked war achieved the exact opposite. On the 4th of April 2023, NATO officially welcomed Finland as its 31st member. With the handing over of documents and raising of the Finnish flag, the Kremlin suddenly found itself with an extra 1,300 kilometers of NATO territory on its border, the alliance's largest physical expansion since 2004. In the couple of weeks since, endless articles have been written about Putin's grand strategic failure. Yet it's not just thanks to geography that Finland's accession has been such a failure for Moscow. It's also thanks to Helsinki's fielding one of the best militaries in Europe. Despite having a population of just 5.54 million, Finland's army is high-tech, experienced, and capable of quickly calling up over 250,000 troops. In today's
Guys, I've seen your military. Well, I've seen videos on your military, and wow, I'm very, very impressed. Like I said in one of my last videos, the fact that the majority of your citizens are military trained. I know for a fact Russia did not want you guys to join NATO, because now it's almost like there's a front line, you know, on the border, on the literal border of Russia. There's a front line of NATO, and that's you guys. And yeah, like, NATO's more powerful with Finland on board because you guys have an amazing military. So, and it's important. It's to protect you. You're getting protection by having the backup of the rest of NATO, and it's protection for us because we have someone, we have a country, we have an ally on the border, on the front line, and intelligence there to figure out if anything's happening, to notify the rest of NATO, to notify NATO member countries, Europe and America and all the other NATO countries that XYZ is happening in Russia, or they're planning something. So yeah, it's just so good. I'm so happy that you guys have joined. Honestly,
today's video, we're analysing the strength of NATO's newest army and discussing exactly what Finnish accession means for the alliance and for Russia.
The trauma of memory.
On the eve of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a small number of polling companies turned their attention to Moscow's northwest neighbour to see what the Finns thought of NATO membership. By then, Finland had been a member of NATO's Partnership for Peace initiative for 28 years. For 27 of those years, Helsinki had also been a part of the alliance's planning and review process. In fact, NATO and Finland worked so closely together that the Nordic country was often described as being, quote, as close to NATO as a country can be without being an actual member. Yes, in those weeks before Putin unleashed his genocidal war, it seemed that actually joining the alliance was a step Helsinki would never take. Polls showed NATO accession to be deeply unpopular, supported by barely a third of the population. In many ways, this wasn't a surprise. Decades of polling had never shown a majority in favour. At that point, it looked like Finland would continue charting its neutral course for decades to come. And then
that makes sense though, because like, why would you want to join NATO? Back in the day, why would you want to join NATO? Because the worry is, as a country, joining something like NATO is fighting the wars of other countries. You know, you don't want to pull your citizens into a war that has been started by another country. And when I say another country, we know the country we're talking about, right? You guys know the USA. The USA, because they tend to get into a lot of wars and a lot of conflicts, and other countries get dragged into those wars and those conflicts. And that's the reason why it's probably, you know, some other countries are a bit trepidatious. Is that the right word? Or just a bit like worried about joining. And yeah, obviously with the Russia and Ukraine conflict, that and it being so close to your doorstep, that probably hastened your membership card. You guys are like, oh, we need to be part of NATO because Russia are closing in, and we don't want to be a part of an invasion of Finland. So that's why you got on board. But I understand why prior to that you guys were a bit hesitant to get involved with NATO. I would be as a country if I was a leader of a country and it was like, oh, join NATO and then your citizens will get dragged into wars. I'd be like, absolutely not. We're not joining them. And but for protection, I get it.
Then, on the 24th of February 2022, everything changed. Images of missiles raining down on Kiev didn't just transform politics in Ukraine and the NATO alliance. In Helsinki, too, the unprovoked Russian assault turned everything on its head. When polling companies checked back in March, they found support for Finland joining NATO had leapt to 60%. By May, more than 3/4 of the population were clamouring for shelter beneath the nuclear umbrella. When Finland's parliament voted on a cession, only 8 out of 200 members rejected the bill. Fast forward to today, and all major parties support Helsinki's new place in the alliance, along with over 80% of voters. All of which begs the question, what happens? How did Putin's failed war of aggression so completely galvanize public opinion? And the answer lies in Finland's tortured history. For nearly 110 years, starting in 1809, Finland suffered the same fate that befell so many regions in the 19th century. It was colonized, in this case by the Russian Empire. While other parts of the empire would experience strict Russification, though, the Grand Duchy of Finland was always allowed a degree of autonomy. It maintained its own senate, for example. Still, that doesn't mean things were rosy. When the Russian Empire collapsed in 1917, the Finns were among those nationalities that headed for the exit. All of which sets up nicely for modern Finland's foundational story, the Winter War. Now, we already did a full-length video on the Winter War about a year ago, so we're not going to go into too many...
You know, I've watched a little bit on the Winter War. Well, yeah, kind of. I've touched on the Winter War, but not properly. But I've watched the Tontamaton Solitas. Is that the... I don't know how it's pronounced, but that is the movie I watched. And it was kind of to do with the Winter War and your conflict with Russia. And after watching that, I really realised, oh, you guys have a history, like serious history. And yeah... you want backup from the rest of Europe and the rest of NATO, just in case Russia gets any ideas, of the past.
Details here. The basic version is that in 1939, the USSR invaded Finland, hoping to crush that whole independence thing, only for Finland to turn what should have been a Soviet cakewalk into a catastrophe. Although Helsinki was ultimately defeated, the Finns inflicted so many casualties that Stalin was forced to settle for taking a slice of territory and letting Finland remain independent. When the two sides fought another war later in World War II, the outcome was mostly the same. In this way, Finland managed to guarantee it wouldn't become another Soviet colony. Sadly, it also wouldn't manage to be truly independent. The Cold War term for what happens next was Finlandization. Based on a 1948 treaty with the USSR, it forced Finland to swear strict neutrality, rejecting ever joining NATO and allowing the Soviets final say in much of the nation's foreign policy. In other words, it was a halfway house between freedom and colonization. Not quite a return to the Grand Duchy of Finland days, but hardly independence as most of us would understand it. And
so you guys took that stance really not to ruffle any feathers on both sides, like, or mostly Russia. You're like, okay, we're not going to join NATO. I didn't think about that part. That's another reason why you didn't join NATO, because it's like, if we join NATO, Russia's going to look at us like, you know, it's going to cause trouble, you know, it's going to cause trouble, and Russia's going to come knocking on the door. But what's the alternative? Not join NATO? And then Russia invade? Or join NATO and Russia be pissed off? You know?
And that's how things more or less remained until the collapse of the USSR. For the Finnish government, the post-Cold War era was the first time since World War II that they'd tasted full sovereignty. Almost as if to celebrate, they joined the EU in 1995. Despite this general westward shift, though, they never joined NATO. Partly this was to avoid angering Russia. Partly it was because Helsinki felt it didn't need the added protection. Strong defense cooperation with its neighbor Sweden meant Finland could field one of the most high-tech militaries on the continent. And besides, this was the post-Cold War era. The idea of a large European state attacking a smaller neighbor was a thing of the past. Right? Sadly, now we know that wasn't the case. The invasion of Ukraine made it clear to Finns that another winter war was a realistic possibility. And this time, Helsinki didn't want to be holding off the Russian bear alone. No. So, you ready to take command of a squad of soldiers and fight in mass?
It's the most clever. It's a very measured, intelligent thing that Finland did was join NATO. Because like the way they just marched into Ukraine, like what's up? I'm just gonna march into Ukraine. That's insane. That's insane. That shows Putin does not care. He does not care. And if he wanted to, he'll just march to Finland and start a war because he'd just be like, you guys need to be part of Russia. And I get why you've joined.
Massive battles with hundreds of targets? Then look no further than Enlisted, the new first-person shooter game from Darkflow Software. Enlisted offers a unique gaming experience by combining PvP with PvE combat. You can play through multiple campaigns, each featuring their own weapons, soldiers, and a premium account. Join the battle today with Enlisted, and now back to today's video.
Men in the field.
Although Finland may have joined NATO in the hopes of deterring Russian aggression, the alliance didn't open the door out of the goodness of Jens Stoltenberg's heart. Those at NATO headquarters in Brussels knew they'd be getting something special out of the deal. A highly competent military with eye-watering manpower reserves. On paper, Finland's defense forces seem small, a mere fraction of what other militaries are capable of fielding. Around 19,000 troops are serving at any given time, with an extra 3,000 or so in the border guard. Given that both Ukraine and Russia currently have 1 million men under arms, this is a seriously tiny amount, barely a rounding error compared to Kiev's or Moscow's forces. But these are just Finland's active duty personnel. Were a war to break out, Helsinki can scale up. And it can scale up fast. At the end of the Cold War, most European armies that still used conscription abolished that model, switching instead to smaller armies made up of professional soldiers. But not Finland. Even as the Swedes were like, yay, the Cold War's over, let's give young people freedom to drive their Volvos, the Finns, well, they kept conscription going. Every year, the military trains 22,000 conscripts. Constitutionally, every Finnish man between ages 18 and 60 must serve, while Finnish women can do so on a voluntary basis. That means Helsinki has a huge pool of potential fighters that it can draw on. In event of general mobilization, that small Finnish army would quickly balloon to 280,000, with an additional 900,000 held in reserve. That's a larger army than Germany can field, and Germany has a population of 83 million. Finland's entire population of 5.45 million could fit inside the Berlin metropolitan region. Of course, we're currently witnessing a war in which mobilized reservists have played a huge role, and the results, to put it mildly, have not been encouraging. On April the 2nd, 2023, the UK MOD detailed how mobilized Russians are often too drunk to competently fight. The big difference is that Russia's conscription model is inherently corrupt, funneling the poor into a nasty system that brutalizes them while the rich and connected easily opt out. By contrast, the Finnish system is equitable, and it places strict emphasis.
So Russia also has conscription, but their conscription is like below par, and they treat their conscripts really badly, and they're drunk and poor. So they're not going to be good fighters. Whereas you guys, I've watched the conscription videos, and you treat your soldiers really well. It's really professional, really good training. You get really good benefits. You get really good benefits when you leave. They really look after you. So like, yeah, you guys have a good. I just know. That's what I said. Like, you're pretty much all combat ready. So it's a powerful army. It's a powerful army. And no wonder NATO's just like, cha-ching, you're on board. That's a lot of
lifelong
soldiers.
Rehearsals to maintain combat readiness. After an initial service of between 6 and 12 months, depending on role, citizens have to return for repeated refresher courses in the following years. This is augmented by those attached to local defense units who meet much more frequently and train much more regularly. The result is a force that's both capable and trained to a high level of readiness, yet also much larger than that of peer nations. Sweden, for example, has slightly more active personnel than Finland, but a mere 31,000 reservists. This, despite having double the population. Another thing the Finns have going for them is their willingness to fight. One of the main reasons the Russian warship didn't grind its way across the whole of Ukraine last year is that the population more or less unanimously agreed that it could go itself. That sort of determination can work wonders, and it's a determination the Finns also seem to have. Polls before and after Russia's full-scale invasion have shown that the number of Finns willing to fight and die for their country stands at over 3/4, one of the highest ratios in Europe. This may be why some Finns...
Go on, Finns. Go on. You guys are like, nah, no way is anyone coming into this country. There's no way Russia's going to step onto this country and we're not going to fight. That's very patriotic. That makes me proud and I'm not even a Finn. Like, yeah, that's really good. Because I know in England it wouldn't be that. It wouldn't be 3/4 of the population. Well, actually, I say that now, but actually, no. I think if we were threatened with invasion, we would step up. However, we have a great army. We do have a great army, but we don't have any reserves. We don't have many reserves. There's a lot of people that would not take up arms, but yeah, we have the same fighting spirit. But you guys, 3/4 of your population said we would fight. That's awesome.
Finns are currently calling for the gender restrictions on conscription to be scrapped. If this is the army Helsinki can field with just men and volunteer women, imagine what it could do if every woman aged 18 to 60 was also included, especially since the military's now getting a cash injection. After years hovering just below the NATO-advised annual defense spending budget level of 2% of GDP, Finland will mark its first year in the alliance by boosting spending to 2.2%. That'll mean new equipment and weapon systems to bring Helsinki up to NATO standards. Not that it'll be a big jump. For such a small nation, Finland is already in possession of some seriously impressive kit. Here's a comparison point for you if you want a quick way to envisage Finland's military capabilities. Imagine someone handed you full control of the armies of Germany, Sweden, Norway, and Poland. Now imagine your first order was for each of these nations to assemble all their artillery in one place. Well, congratulations, according to the Wilson Center, you'd still be looking at a smaller number of artillery than Helsinki alone can field. Overall, the Finnish army is known to have around 100 rocket launch systems, 700 howitzers, and 700 heavy mortars, for a total of 1,500. That's a total that includes the M270 multiple launch rocket systems, which can fire high-precision missiles over long distances in rapid succession, as well as South Korea's legendary K9 armored howitzers. Go looking at other branches of the military too, and you'll find equally impressive missile systems. The Air Force, for example, fields JASSM air-to-surface cruise missiles, while the Navy operates Israel's Gabriel 5 low-altitude anti-ship missiles. Much of this is thanks to a spending spree that defined much of the late 2010s and early 2020s, a spending spree that is still making its full impact felt. So let's look again at the Air Force, currently flying a fleet of FA-18 Hornet jets. Just 2 years ago, in 2021, Helsinki inked a deal to upgrade the lot of them. Over the next 7 years, the fleet will be phased out and replaced with 64 of Lockheed Martin's F-35A Block 4s. That's a cutting-edge fighter jet, and it's not just the Air Force that's operating at such a high level. Back in 2014, the government upgraded its main battle tanks to German Leopard 2A6s, one of the best all-rounder tanks currently available. Overall, the spend has taken Finland's fleet to 312 tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, enough to put Finnish forces on par with major European armies like France. The Navy, likewise.
Wow. Wow, look at you guys. On par with France, and France is a huge country, huge population, and you guys have like the military might of those countries. Wow.
Is undergoing modernization, with 4 Pajama-class multi-role corvettes currently under construction. At the same time, an emphasis is being put on expanding Finland's ability to conduct underwater warfare. This last bit gets at a key reason why NATO wanted Finland on site and why Russia desperately wanted to stop it happening. Or rather, 2 reasons. 2 separate bodies of water that the Finns can operate in better than most other NATO members: the Baltic Sea and the Arctic Ocean. So let's start with the Baltic Sea. If you look on a European NATO map dated before Finland joined, you might notice an obvious weak point. The three tiny Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Squashed up against Russia, Belarus, and the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, the Baltic states are joined to the rest of NATO by only a 65-kilometer strip of Poland's northeast. When the Ukraine war first broke out, there were fears that Putin's next move might be to attack that region, to cut the Baltics off from resupply. With Finland on board, though, it becomes possible for NATO to resupply via water. Tallinn is only 70 kilometers from Helsinki across the waves, a short gap, which could also help the alliance cut off St. Petersburg, denying Russia access to the Baltic Sea. Up in the Arctic Ocean is a different story, but likewise an important one. While Finland doesn't actually have an Arctic coastline, its very north is cut off from the waters by Norway, the nation does happen to be very, very good at designing and building icebreakers. This is important because icebreakers are an area where Russia currently have a massive advantage. Moscow owns around 40 of them, meaning the chilly, ice-filled Arctic Ocean is the Kremlin's domain.
Icebreaker? I didn't even know that was a thing. So it's like a ship that breaks the ice for other ships to go through? Is that what an icebreaker is? I don't know what, he didn't explain what an icebreaker was, but I'm guessing that's what that is.
Domain. Finland adds another 9 to NATO's fleet, but also the know-how and ability to manufacture more, a potentially vital skill as the planet warms and the northern sea route becomes ever more crucial. Rosy as this chapter has been, though, we wouldn't be doing our job if we just told you everything's going to be hunky-dory now that Finland is in the alliance. No, to really do this topic justice, we now need to turn our attention to the possible downsides, from potential deficiencies in the Finnish military to Russian plans to destabilize NATO's newest member.
He's a scary individual. Look at it. You can see, like, he's just dead behind the eyes. Like, scary individual.
At the end of the second chapter today, we mentioned how Helsinki was boosting its military spend to over 2% of GDP. That's a lot of money, and as we pointed out, it will help with the purchase of even more top-of-the-range kit. However, we should note that Finland's post-Cold War military spending hasn't always been so generous. There have been two significant dips when funding dropped to barely 1% of GDP. First in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and second at the height of the Eurozone crisis. In both cases, spend subsequently recovered, but those cuts left deep scars. Scars that, especially in the latter case, have yet to fully heal. From 2012 to 2015, austerity forced the closure of multiple military bases. Closures that now look like potential gaps in a defensive line against Russian attack. In a 2022 article, War on the Rocks highlighted these closures as a significant issue should war break out, alongside Finland's lack of a large defense industrial base. When Finland does produce some world-class military equipment, most of the work is done by small businesses, which is great during peacetime, but a potential issue should conflict break out and the army require replacement kit as fast as possible. Still, these issues are relatively minor, something Finnish generals should probably bear in mind, but it's unlikely to seriously undermine Helsinki's defense.
So that's probably why you guys joined, right? Because if you haven't got, like, can get supplies quickly, being part of NATO, the member countries, we can supply ammunition to you very, very quick.
Capacity. A far greater danger likely comes from across the eastern border. With Finland now in NATO, all of Vladimir Putin's most paranoid nightmares have suddenly come true, and that makes Russia a more acute threat than ever. To understand exactly how Putin sees the idea of Finland in NATO, we only need to look at a story told by President Sauli Niinisto. In a meeting with the Russian autocrat in 2016, he said Putin warned him, when we look across the border now, we see a Finn on the other side. If Finland joins NATO, we will see an enemy. The reasons for this aren't just Putin's obsession with stopping NATO expansion. They're also strategic. For one thing, NATO now almost totally surrounds the Baltic Sea, meaning the enclave of Kaliningrad could be cut off. The biggest strategic fear, though, is likely the Kola Peninsula. Directly bordering Finland's east, the peninsula is where Russia stations its northern fleet. With attack submarines and missile-bearing surface vessels, this is the fleet that's intended to destroy American supply ships in the event of a full-blown Russia-NATO conflict. Putin wants the alliance as far away from them as possible. More importantly, though, the Northern Fleet also maintains Russia's nuclear-armed submarines, the exact ones that are responsible for the nation's second strike capabilities. For Putin, having NATO anywhere near this peninsula is about as appetizing as you having your lunch anywhere near a giant messy dog poo. Already, the Kremlin has announced plans to boost troop numbers on the Finnish border and in the nearby Republic of Karelia. But with Moscow unlikely to have spare troops that it can free up from the Ukraine quagmire, Russia may well turn to hybrid warfare techniques to register its displeasure. And it's here that things start getting quite dicey. One fear of the Ukraine war has been Putin's repeated nuclear threats. Should NATO start to station personnel and equipment in Finland, it's possible these threats might get directed at Helsinki. Now, this...
Oh no, guys. Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of posturing, right? There's gonna be a lot of like Putin kind of showing the might of Russia, and like there's gonna be demonstrations of power at some point, and you need to be ready. But we've got you back. We've got you back.
This is unlikely to involve Putin literally saying, hey Finland, I'm going to blow you up, but it might involve a more aggressive nuclear posture, including the redeployment of missiles. At the same time, so-called grey zone tactics might become the norm. You know, the stuff Russia used to be good at in the pre-Ukraine war era. The hacking, disinformation campaigns, election meddling, that sort of thing. Finns still have bitter memories of 2015 when Russian authorities suddenly sent 30,000 illegal immigrants across their border, a tactic Belarus would famously recycle in 2021 against Poland. The goal would be to destabilize Finnish society and cause ruptures, all at a minimum cost to Russia. Although how successful this is might be up for grabs. Back in 2015, the world was still unused to Moscow's hybrid warfare. Today, governments are a lot better prepared. In Finland's case, they're also prepared for a full-blown conflict. So it's time to end this video with perhaps the most interesting section of all, the Finnish plans for how to take on Russia in a future land war.
How will you take them on a future land war? Ooh, guys, are you prepared? Are you prepared for them? It sounds like you are prepared. I think you guys probably have been preparing since the Winter War. Like, you haven't really stopped, because it's you know that they've always had their eyes set on your land, their eyes set on Finland, and having a border with them is just, I can imagine the paranoia that you guys must feel that Russia are constantly trying to attack. So I'm sure you're very, very prepared.
Perhaps the strangest feature of the Ukraine war is how unprepared either side was for the conflict. The Ukrainians only started making serious preparations in the last week, so afraid was the government of provoking Putin. The Kremlin, meanwhile, seems to have devised a plan that basically went, step 1, attack Ukraine, step 2, I don't know, step 3, profit. Now, given all of that, it's a remarkable testament to Ukrainian will and courage that their army held the invaders off, but Helsinki hasn't placed all of its hopes in a similar coming together of society. Rather, the Finns are gambling on extensive preparations to bring them to victory. Known as comprehensive security, the plan requires the entire nation to effectively be ready for war to erupt at a moment's notice. That means a government body known as the National Emergency Supply Agency constantly maintaining 6-month stockpiles of food and fuel. It means all pharmacies and doctors working under a legal requirement to stockpile up to 10 months' worth of medicines. It even means architects and builders getting in on the act. Anyone who wants to construct a building above a certain size must include a bomb shelter. Meanwhile, the owners of underground civilian structures like car parks and swimming pools must have plans to quickly convert them into public shelters and evacuation centers. I remember the early days of the Ukraine war when social media was flooded with images of grandmas making Molotov cocktails and ordinary citizens lining up to get Kalashnikovs. Well, the Finnish method is to basically do with rigorous forward planning what the Ukrainians did semi-spontaneously. And that extends not just to people but also to businesses. If you live in Finland and head a business that in some way supports critical infrastructure, then you will almost certainly be called into regular meetings to go over your plan of action for conflict. Some of this stuff is obvious. Telecoms companies needing to have backup systems to keep civilian lines of communication open. Food distributions making plans to keep people fed in wartime conditions. Other aspects, though, go beyond what you might expect. Toilet paper companies, for example, have systems for keeping the nation's bathrooms stocked in case of a blockade. More seriously, media organizations and the church are also required to map out how they will keep people informed of events in a crisis. NGOs must be ready to go at a moment's notice.
Wow, so you guys are really prepared for war? You're super prepared for war. Prepared for war. It sounds like. And that's good. Because you're on the border, and it could happen. And if it does happen, you need to be ready. That's really good. I'm glad that you're prepared. I feel like that's a Finnish thing to be, though. You're very efficient with things. You like things planned in advance. I think that's a very Finnish way of being, which is a very good way of being, just in case of the war. So well done.
In many ways, this total defense policy is made possible by conscription, which ensures all members of the elite are on the same page regarding threats. And just in case anyone has forgotten, the government runs national defense courses for politicians, business leaders, and media figures every year. Courses where they wargame how they and their industries would respond if word came that Russian tanks had crossed the border. Combine this with cycles of military training, and it's easy to see how sparsely populated Finland could be a force to be reckoned with. And that's not even including higher-level plans like mining the Baltic Sea or having combat aircraft take off on sorties from remote roads. As some wags on social media would put it, rather than have Finland join NATO, perhaps it would have been better to just have NATO join Finland. Still, we shouldn't get carried away. What Finland brings to the alliance won't be the equivalent to the superpower of the United States or to the nuclear-armed militaries of France and Britain, nor will it bring the sheer amount of investment that Poland recently has. What it will bring, though, is a highly adept, well-armed, and well-trained army that punches way above its weight. An army backed by a society that's more prepared to defend itself than almost any other nation in Europe. Combine all of this, and it's clear that the alliance's 30...
Yeah, combine that, just you guys being awesome anyways, and your military being powerful, then with having the backup of some of the biggest armies in the world. The Americas, France, UK... Germany, like these big armies. Like, I think we'll be all right. I think we'll be all right because we're gonna back you up as long as you back us up as well. I think we'll be okay. I don't think. Well, I say I don't think Putin would try anything, but yeah, he's this guy. He's a different species to the normal person. To the average person. I just feel like he just has a screw loose. So he probably would try and attack Finland, but he's not going to have an easy time, and that's evident.
31st member may just turn out to be one of its most valuable. Putin may have started his war hoping to halt NATO expansion. With the accession of Finland, though, the dictator has only ensured he now has a more than capable opponent right on his doorstep. So thanks for tuning in.
Well, I've learned a lot more about Finland and your capabilities if a war broke out with Russia. And I think you're very well prepared. The last bit really shocked me. I didn't realize you had all these contingency plans just in case a war did break out, like the bunkers and swimming pools being converted and community centers and schools or whatever, and all places having those plans in place just in case something happened. I think more countries need to be like that because there definitely isn't anything. Not in any of the organisations I worked in when I lived in England. I don't know of any plans. They didn't teach us, or they didn't say, okay, this is what's gonna happen if we ever get attacked by Russia. But it's really, really great that you guys have that in place. And I guess because you're bordered with Russia, it's always a threat. But I'm glad you're part of NATO, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Until the next one, I will see you very soon.